Welcome back, guys, to the Beyond Condition podcast, the voice of bodybuilding. And today's voice, all the way from the US of A, which always excites me, Stan. I'm jumping in because you guys, you play it straight, and it makes so much sense on a podcast to just be able to go back and forth and be an open book. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Oh, pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
And I have to ask you, where did the Rhino come from, which is your sort of catchphrase on Instagram?
Yeah, that was Flex Wheeler back in 2008. I started training with my idol from back in the early 90s, Flex Wheeler, and he nicknamed me the Rhino. I was a very strong bodybuilder, as you know, and he thought that was a suiting title, and it just stuck. And everybody, I think it was because in Muscular Development did a big 10-page spread on my powerlifting IFBB pro bodybuilding stuff. They labeled me as the Rhino, and so it's stuck ever since. Yeah.
Okay. So on Instagram, it's Stan Rhino Efferding.
That's right.
Of course, if people want to follow you after this episode, we're going to cover stress and recovery management, but we're also going to wrap up the part 2 of the mental health series and touch on the topics that are going to feed in really nicely to what we're talking about today, because I feel like we can go on a bit of a mission here to make stress and recovery management less boring for the listeners, because it's something that's undervalued, right?
Right, I agree.
It's certainly, I mean, I talk from experience, it's certainly something that we get into this mind warp of doing more is better. Now, I'm sure you'll agree, you know, it's something that competitors do.
I agree, yeah. One of the biggest problems now, I think, is that we get so many distractions. It's hard to focus on one goal, and just the enormity of all the things you'd like to accomplish can kind of overwhelm you, thinking of the big picture. I want to do, you know, and it's appropriately, you know, right after the New Year's, everybody made their New Year's resolutions. Most of them have probably gone by the wayside already, and it's understandable and it's acceptable. But it's, I think, primarily because we probably create too lofty of an expectation. And we're looking at the outcome as the final destination rather than the journey and the process, and whether or not we're going to tackle this project in 10-minute bits daily, or when am I going to complete this project? When am I going to have time to do this? And the fact of the matter is you never have time. You have to etch out a little bit consistently, which is kind of a lesson I learned from bodybuilding. It's the very same method, bodybuilding and powerlifting, under which you make progress over a long, extended period of time. It's just keep repeating the same successful behaviors every meal, every hour of sleep, every workout, every rep, every set. And you know, we're just obsessive about tracking all of those things. And you know, fortunately, it's immediate feedback. That's the difference between these New Year's resolutions or a business goal and bodybuilding, is that you get immediate feedback. Every time you go to the gym, you know what your numbers were yesterday or 3 days ago. And if you don't outperform that, something happened in the last 48 to 72 hours, a missed night's sleep, a missed meal, some stress, you know, dehydration, what have you. And sometimes maybe overtraining. The nice thing about it is you can correct it really quickly if you're pretty diligent about tracking everything that goes into every single bout of performance, every single workout. Business isn't the same. You can invest a lot of time and energy and not know that you're headed the right direction. And that's a frustrating thing. I had been fortunate to be successful in both, and I've utilized some of those lessons of just kind of repeating the same behaviors until you come across something that works, and then just keep doing that over and over and over again.
Yeah, for sure. I really like as well where you included managing expectations, because this is a sport, let's face it, you know, we can say it how it is. It's on Instagram as this sort of highlight reel of, wow, bodybuilding. And certainly over the years, it's got to that point where it's like a lot of people are like, well, I'll jump into this sport. And for me, myself, and I'm sure you're the same, you know, managing the expectations of actually what goes into the day in, day out. If you're looking to pursue something like, you know, IFBB Pro or that elite level, which seems almost on Instagram very reachable for people nowadays.
Right. And it's not terribly reachable. That's the problem with Instagram, is that you're surrounding yourself by the top 0.1%, and you think that's normal. And it's not. A natural athlete might be lucky to put on a pound of muscle a month initially as a newbie. And, our expectations are, obviously you can lose fat at a much greater rate and see some improvement in terms of body composition and definition, but adding the muscle is the long, arduous, it certainly has to be something that you enjoy doing, or you're never gonna be successful because it's so slow. And I fortunately, like yourself, probably, ever since I touched a weight as a teenager, I just absolutely love it. And so, I've always said the best exercise is the one you'll do. And I don't prescribe training programs to people, that's not something they enjoy, because it's not going to be sustainable. And, compliance is the science is my mantra. And if I can't find something they enjoy doing consistently, and I always ask that question, rather than assigning them some sort of cardio or exercise protocol, I'm like, what do you like to do? If it's pickleball, it's pickleball. I'd throw in the 10-minute walks because they're pretty easy to adhere to. And as for the training, it's all just tools. I don't care, any kind of resistance training. If you want to, carry something heavy or find your favorite machine in the gym, it doesn't have to be a squat. And that might be my preference as an old meat neck power lifter, but I don't presume to think everybody enjoys that. So I just try and find things they enjoy. When I used to bring clients into the gym and train them, which I did for many, many years, for decades, as a matter of fact. Anymore, I'm like yourself. I either travel or I do a lot of stuff online. I do own a gym here in town, and I have a kids power hour every week. And but I don't do a lot of one-on-one training. But when I used to do that, the first thing I would do is have them try a whole bunch of different things and ask them, how's that feel? How do you like that? And then have them repeat that, twice a week, just consistency.
Yeah. And it's that consistency, being able to rinse and repeat. And like you say there, the journey of it. And it's certainly a question I ask, what are you doing this for? Because as you touched on, it's a very, very small percentage of people that, bodybuild and then compete, but on Instagram, it's like, you start following bodybuilders and you're like, well, everyone does it. And then it's like, well, no, actually as well, what you touched on about putting muscle on, natty or assisted, assisted, of course, it is slightly different, but it still takes time to be able to gain quality muscle tissue. So the first topic we actually went into on this part of the mental health series was staying lean all year round. So people that sort of, you touch that stage lean, and again, I've done it myself, becomes very addictive. People, they look at your physique and there's that instant gratification. And it's sometimes, very hard from a coaching standpoint, or people that I speak to, it is hard for people to step away from that lean physique. But if we feed this into the stress on the body and what that looks like when you're trying to, of course, gain that hormonal status back and everything that comes off the back of prep, maybe we could talk about that a little bit, Stam.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And again, we're back to Instagram showing us pictures of people with these, veins in their six-pack. It's not something that is sustainable. It's not an enjoyable place to be, certainly, in terms of your general energy. I mean, your hormone levels will drop, testosterone, your sleep will suffer, your thyroid will be suppressed, your energy levels will decline. Your hunger will be through the roof. You'll constantly be thinking about food. I started competing in 1988. And so I've dieted down for bodybuilding competitions to single-digit body fat, whatever that may be, 4, 5, 6%, whatever you want to call it. And I recall, this is why I have so much empathy for people who are trying to lose weight, whether they're obese or what have you. It doesn't matter whether they're trying to get ready for a bodybuilding show or whether they're 100 pounds overweight. The feeling is the same, that overwhelming hunger, food noise, the inability to sleep and the stomach growling. And that really is the hurdle, the biggest hurdle. The number one reason that diets fail is because of that hormonal hunger signaling. It very well is. And some people have a greater genetic predisposition, and having more body fat also makes you more susceptible to things like leptin resistance, leptin being the satiety hormone. And people become resistant to that. And so they don't really feel the same satiety signals. They're hungry all the time. As you lose weight, your ghrelin starts pumping out, which is your hunger hormone. And this is why it's so difficult, why we have such a high recidivism, a failure rate, a weight regain problem. 50% within the first year, probably 70–80% after 2 years, and north of 90+% after 3 years, if not gaining more weight back than you originally started with, because you lost a significant amount of muscle, and that causes an additional problem with your basal metabolic rate and your weight regain. So I'm very empathetic, because I remember going to bed at night dreaming about food. It's all I could think about. I would actually picture almost in 3D the pizza going through the pizza oven, and the pepperoni curling up at the edges, and the cheese boiling, and I was obsessed with it. And I was, I'm a very disciplined individual, but it's not enough. Discipline, willpower is not a good strategy. You'll lose that battle every time. And mine was just, I had a short-term goal. It wasn't like I anticipated I'd have to feel this way forever, which is what the general population, dad bods and soccer moms feel like. It's like, how long does this go on? I'm 100 pounds or 50 pounds away from where I want to be. I had a show in 10 weeks, so I can grind it out, and I know I can gain the weight back later, whatever. But that's not any kind of life to live. And when you get on stage and when you're in that kind of condition, you're not fit. You couldn't fight your way out of a paper bag. You can't do anything. You're just exhausted. And so I don't wish that upon anyone. And so it is very challenging. And you and I both work with a lot of Gen Pop. Probably the primary thing we do is help people with weight loss. Probably better than 90% of our clientele. I know I'm known for working with professional athletes, etc., but the vast majority, those guys don't pay, by the way. Just don't be confused. Yeah, they're just great for your resume, but they have 100 guys lined up right behind you that will do it for free. And certainly I've had some real high-profile professional athletes who have compensated me, very well. But for the most part, those folks are good for your resume, and you feel a sense of accomplishment when you can help them achieve their goal. No question. Yeah. But it's the Gen Pop that need the most help, that have, they're not the genetically predispositioned people. They're probably, not the most disciplined or consistent with that particular pursuit. Yeah. Right? That's not their thing. This isn't something they do because they enjoy it. They have careers and kids and everything else, and this whole weight loss thing is just a nuisance to them. And they need some guidance, but it's certainly not a priority of theirs necessarily, but for the fact that it makes them feel terrible, either emotionally or physically. And so it is challenging, and I hate the fact that I didn't get into physical therapy or chiropractic, because they've got a 95% success ratio, because the vast majority of pain resolves itself spontaneously in 4 to 6 weeks. So no matter what you do, you can wave a candle over somebody, and the vast majority of them will feel better in 4 to 6 weeks. Yeah. Tongue in cheek, but and then we've got this horrendous success rate, and this constant recidivism, and clients coming back and forth and going off the rails and regaining the weight, and it's frustrating. And then we've got, of course, social media, which is one of the biggest banes of our existence, is what I call the shiny object syndrome. And every other day there's some whack job telling people they have to completely cut out some macronutrient, or they have to do some outrageous training program, or and you're just like, no. And you're talking to desperate people, and it's like somebody with cancer telling them, oh, you don't need chemotherapy, you just come on down and get my holistic treatment. And it's like, I understand why guys like Layne Norton and others get so upset, because we're trying to help people, and there's folks out there giving just horrendous information and actually harming people.
Yeah. Oh, I love that you've said that, because no one sort of organically said it on a podcast yet. I mean, I've been doing this for 2 years, and it's normally me that sort of says, it's so detrimental to our community, because, if you see a reel or whatever it is, this snippet of someone saying this is bad, and you maybe already have this food in your diet, or maybe you've overeaten and you're trying to get back on track, or you're doing something that they're sort of almost bashing, where does that leave the person with no education and feeling like a bag of shit? And then it's like, how does that person come back round? Or does it then lead to food pathologies, which feeds into, that pressure that we get? And it's so unfair, Stan. It really upsets me.
I know. And you may have experienced the same thing. I've had clients come to my office and actually cry because they told me that the doctor they were going to, or whatever practitioner was going to help, refused to help them if they wouldn't go on their particular diet. In this case, and generally the case, is keto. Let me say this on the outset, that all diets work when they're strictly adhered to. And keto's fine, intermittent fasting's fine, continuous caloric restriction is fine. I should say this, there's only 3 ways to lose weight, right? Everything falls into 3 categories. I think Dr. Peter Attia summed this up some years ago, and I kind of stole it from him. CR, DR, and TR. Those are the 3 ways you can lose weight. All diets fall under one of those 3 categories. CR is calorie restriction. If you weigh and measure your food, you look at labels and you try and eat less than, what your total daily caloric allotment was calculated to be. DR is dietary restriction. Eliminate carbs. Go vegan. Go carnivore. Go paleo. Don't eat anything that a caveman didn't spear. Those are all methods of dietary restriction. And the other one is TR, time restriction. 16/8, alternate day fasting, OMAD. Those are all dietary restriction, and they can all lead to weight loss. And they're the big difference between them is which one can the individual adhere to? Yeah. Which one feels the least restrictive? Which one are you the least hungry on? And so people find that they're successful under any one of those different options, and the research shows the same. None have emerged as being more successful than the other. And within any trial, so you got 100 people being tested, some will lose weight, some will gain weight on the same diet. Yeah. And so there really isn't a consensus. There's some nuance, and there's some definitely some pros and cons to each. I don't know how deep we need to get into nutrition, but the point is that I think it's better to give people a better explanation so they have more options, not less. If this doesn't work for them, then that. Let's try these things. But ultimately, they all work for the same reason. They all allow you to create a calorie deficit and hopefully sustain that over an extended period of time, because they satiate you. And that is, again, the number one reason diets fail is you get hungry and then you overeat. Yeah. And so that's a really important thing, I think, to get across to folks. And sometimes they don't like all the choices. They just, when we Google something, we want to know what's the best, right? What's the best diet? And I've always said it's the one you'll follow. Okay. But we want to be told, so when I go to a mechanic, I don't want to learn how to rebuild my car. I just want you to fix it. So Stan, just tell me exactly what to eat. And I'm like, okay, but you got to answer these couple of questions first. What do you like to eat? When do you like to eat? Where do you like to eat? Let's try and figure this out. And let's use a host of different satiety tips, right? More protein, more fiber, more whole foods, less ultra processed foods, maybe drink a little more water. There's a whole list of different things you can do that's in our little tool bag, even the combination of which are, again, still challenging to adhere to long term. But at least you're utilizing all the resources that are available. And then ultimately, if you're a yo-yo dieter and you just can't lose the weight, and your genetic hunger signaling is so extraordinary that, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on the practitioner that's making the declaration, we do have some medications that can help people now. The new semaglutide, the GLP-1 agonists, and what they do is they satiate you, and so you don't overeat. That's really all they do, and they're not without their side effects. I don't want to open up that can of worms, but obesity has side effects as well, pretty extreme. It's a 200% increase in cancer risk, et cetera, as compared to what? As compared to a medical intervention. Everybody gets to make their own cost-benefit analysis. That'd be the same thing with a blood pressure medication, or even your teenage daughter taking the pill, or your mom taking a thyroid medication, or somebody with hypogonadism taking testosterone. There are side effects to all of these interventions. And it's for the individual to decide based on the whole of the evidence, if they are privy to it, and they're allowed to, to make that decision with a good practitioner. What's the cost benefit,
I also like as well what you said there about, exploring things with a client. I think that in this realm, it can get very lost. I take on clients that have only done a food plan, and they're actually almost sort of scared at the realms of okay, so let's switch out this green veg for this green veg, or this meat for this meat, and that type of thing. And actually it's our job as coaches to almost nourish, okay, so let's slowly integrate, you know, maybe some more macro tracking, or at a pace that they're comfortable with, because particularly in stage prep, you know, a plan obviously offers itself very well. You've just got so many boxes to tick. It's like, I don't want to think about this. And I'm sure you get that, like you say, Stan, just tell me what to do. So, you know, you go robot mode, but then off the back of that show, it's either, I see this common sort of, either trying to stay lean, or then it's almost like that rebound and then losing complete control. And it's very, very hard as an online coach to be in someone's head. And, you know, you can give all the tools, of course, but like you say, with hunger hormones, it's like, it's a crazy space, isn't it? I'm sure you remember after your first show.
Of course. Yeah. I've been through it all. I'm not claiming to be, you know, some genius. I've learned all of these lessons myself, and they repeat themselves. It's not like I didn't try low carb back in the early 90s. And I worked with 𝗵𝗵 𝗵𝗶 again in 2012.
Oh, did
so
you?
Yeah, I've been to all the gurus. I've tried everything, you know, and I found what worked for me. And I'm suggesting that other people should have the same opportunity to do that without being pressured into a particular diet tribe who uses misinformation, you know, with such as the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity that was popularized by Jason Fung and who was that, Gary Taubes. You know, if you eat a grape, your insulin goes up and you can't lose fat. And it's just, you know, it's been proven over and over and over again, including in the studies that the NIH funded and Gary Taubes was involved in, the Stanford Diet Fits trial with over 600 participants for a year. High carb, low carb, high fat, low fat, it doesn't matter. If you equate for calories and protein, you get to choose. And, you know, you'll still lose weight, and it doesn't have an adverse effect on your blood sugars. And that's one of the current fear-mongering schemes that's going around now with people like the glucose goddess, et cetera. They're wearing the continuous glucose monitors and blood sugar spike, which is a completely normal physiological response to eating food, including protein. But they're scaring people away from, you know, having a balanced diet. You know, I don't need to get too deep into that, but you know, you get the point, is that there's enough research out there to where I don't think it's necessary to fearmonger about particular macronutrients. There's certainly more whole foods, fewer ultra-processed foods. There's certainly foods that are higher in satiety and lower in satiety, as we know. And those are choices that we should make to be successful in our diet and not be, you know, convinced that something's a poison or it's toxic. Those are the words that are thrown around that are frustrating. And I've stepped on a few of my own landmines. I'm allergic to seed oils. They give me diarrhea. And so I ran out and said seed oils are terrible. And they are associated with, they're in a lot of ultra-processed foods, and we consume about 70% of our diet is ultra-processed foods, and they're hidden calories that aren't terribly satiating. So yes, they are associated with weight gain just because of, again, excess calories, you know, energy toxicity. But having said that, they're not uniquely bad for you when consumed, obviously, within reason. And so I even had to be cautious because there's a lot of foods that people are allergic to. Some people have celiac disease. They can't eat gluten. That doesn't mean everyone can't eat gluten. Some people have peanut allergy, and that doesn't mean that everybody can't eat peanuts. Some people have milk allergies. Some people have dairy intolerances, two totally different things, but that might restrain the whether or not, or the amount of dairy they can consume. We see that with shellfish. We see some people have allergic to eggs. So, you know, there's a list of things that some people have to be cautious with. People with IBS might have to avoid or limit their high FODMAP foods, those fermentable vegetables that, fermentable oligomonosaccharides and polyols, high FODMAP foods for those people with IBS. So there are certain conditions under which we should recommend what, you know, the prevailing wisdom is, or what the science tells us as to, you know, what will work best for them under that certain circumstance. But that doesn't mean that we can paint with a broad brush and make a claim that any of those things, gluten, seed oils, peanuts, shouldn't be consumed by someone else who doesn't have a problem with those foods.
Yeah, and of course, you know, actually, when you are in the realms of physique development, if you're sort of flip-flopping between dieting and off-season and going through those phases, actually, you know, I know myself, I've actually gained some sensitivity. So you mentioned there dairy, you know, if I go over a sort of threshold, I do feel a kickback in my digestive system. And then that feeds into, that's then a stressor on my body, and my physique doesn't lend itself well to that. So it's taking ownership and speaking to my coach to say, you know, there's certain things that actually I'm quite sensitive to. But this is where we also go into those realms of, if you're restricting for too long, you can certainly build sensitivities. But I don't think a lot of people actually tie that into, well, it's because you're dieting all the time, because you're cutting things out, aren't you, Stan, you know?
Well, the specific example that you gave of dairy is a perfect example of that. When you cut out dairy, your lactase enzyme will downregulate. And so when you reintroduce it, you're going to get the gas and bloating from it until such time that your lactase enzyme upregulates. The answer to that isn't it's a bad food. The answer is you're going to have to titrate that dose up slowly over time within your tolerable level. And that might be a limit to that. You know, or some people might be able to eat more than others because the lactase enzyme isn't, you know, never ending in its upregulation, or certain populations just don't produce as much and would have to consume less. And the reason I do talk so much about dairy is because there are a lot of benefits for those people who can consume it. The calcium, also especially yogurt, and not so much what we used to believe was the probiotics, but actually the fermentation. And the Sonnenberg trials out of Stanford showed us that 100% of the participants that utilized fermented foods, and this was yogurt, kimchi, a host of others that you're familiar with, sauerkraut, maybe even sourdough bread, even those aren't live bacteria, saw improvements in the diversity and density of their gut microbiome. Whereas the vegetable intervention, the fiber intervention, the respondents were broken into 3 different groups. One had a good response, one had no change, and one group had a poor response. They had a lot of adverse reactions. The presumption with that is that the poor responders had already had a deficient gut microbiome, and so they couldn't tolerate all of the fiber that was thrown at them. And so that's another example of something. When you want to add fiber, add it slowly over an extended period of time. And diversity is better than density, meaning you don't want to eat a pound of carrots. You want to have a few carrots, and then, you know, maybe a little bit of oatmeal and a little, you know, you try and get a diverse amount, small amounts of a diverse group of fibers, rather than doubling down on, you know, drinking a bottle of Metamucil or something like, and we know the reaction to that, but that is a fiber that people consume that can help digestion in small amounts, or at least help the gut microbiome in small amounts, but in large amounts, it can have pretty poor reactions.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, I think this sort of tangent we've gone on would lead itself to actually, you know, stress management, the brain and gut health. It's not something I've really delved into as much per se over my time with the podcast, but I feel like this is an opportunity, Stan, because what is, you know, the stressors that go on in the GI, leading from, you know, that emotive response to eating certain foods, whether you're sensitive to them and you know that, or whether you're binging off the back of a diet, or whatever it may be, you know, this like, I'm really good all week, and at the weekend I have all of this stuff. The stress on the GI system, you're almost causing yourself potential conditions by doing this over time, right?
Yeah, particularly if you reintroduce a whole bunch of foods you haven't been eating consistently over an extended period of time. And anytime you and I are prepping somebody for competition, we ask them not to do anything crazy the last week because their stomach would just reject it. And when you reintroduce large amounts of food post-contest, particularly if they're foods you haven't been eating in a while, that'll be significant. There's a lot about that whole refeed process. One is that you expose yourself to a greater susceptibility of gaining back body fat very quickly. Yes. And so you want to gain your weight back slowly after a competition. Layne Norton had talked about the reverse diet. It may or may not be necessary. The most important part of that is that you just don't slog down too many calories too fast, and do it gradually, because your body is hypersensitive. Your fat cells are hypersensitive to it because you just put them through a pretty traumatic experience, and they will just fill right up. And we've seen that happen. I think it was I don't want to say her name incorrectly, but there was a woman who most famously, Jeff Nippard's girlfriend or wife, was rebounding from a number of competitions that she had done over the years. And you and I have seen it with, you know, figure, physique, bikini, wellness girls over and over again. And they have this rebound, and their hunger signals are all screwed up, and they're just never satisfied. And they can eat and eat and eat and eat and eat, and will gain back an enormous amount of weight. To say nothing about the short-term effects of the edema, the massive water retention that'll occur, which can be dangerous to the point where they might have to go in and get diuretics because of how, you know, how dangerous that can be. So that is a very tough time, and that's what the problem is with the people who are what they call what's the rebound dieting, the losing weight, gaining weight, yo-yo dieting.
Yeah.
They end up losing more muscle than fat when they diet, and they gain back more fat than muscle when they gain the weight back. And over the course of time, they completely change their body composition, which lowers their BMR. So they are burning fewer calories, and we'd see that with some metabolic adaptation. So that's one of the big problems with that weight regain. And so now we're talking about, like you said, the stress and the psychology of the whole thing. And there is the vagus nerve that connects the gut and the brain. And there's been a lot said about it without much evidence. The true domain-specific professionals in psychiatry are hesitant to make any direct relationship between that whole the hunger signaling and all that, and the addictive behaviors, et cetera. We got to be real cautious about how we classify things, because you and I have seen a lot of clients go in and get antidepressant medication going through this process, you know, both on the way into and the way out of competitions, et cetera. Yeah. And I think one of the bigger things is that the larger meals do create a lot of inflammation, just because the calories in them. And there's some small things that you might be able to do, more monounsaturated fats. Obviously, less of a calorie surplus would be great, but more monounsaturated fats, polyphenols, fruits, you know, to get in some of those. Low sugar fruits, berries, blueberries, raspberries, strawberries, you know, eat a salmon, avocado, olive oil, nuts and seeds. Those kinds of things tend not to drive liver fat accumulation, NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, as quickly as, say, a simple refined carb, or worse yet, the number one would be saturated fat. And I'm not demonizing saturated fat. I eat plenty of steak, but under those circumstances, like with rebound eating or hypercaloric, you know, diets, the saturated fat will, calorie for calorie, will increase liver fat at a much faster rate than the monounsaturated fats or the more complex carbs, and even equating for calories. And that's the driver of a lot of the inflammation, a lot of the insulin resistance. Everything kind of comes from, you know, the whole metabolic syndrome kind of comes from the fatty liver. I think more recently it's been referred to as the it's a dual hypothesis. I'm trying to remember, but the fatty liver precedes all those other things. It's not like eating carbs makes you diabetic. It's energy toxicity causing excess liver fat, which then spills over into pancreatic fat, you know, that visceral adiposity, and that starts affecting all of your blood sugars and creates the environment for diabetes. It's not the carbohydrate per se, but that's something that comes later and just aggravates the whole situation. And we know that because when we diet type 2 diabetics, you can diet them on any macro combination as long as they lose a significant amount of weight, even if it's a high carb, low fat diet or a high fat, low carb diet. As long as they lose a significant amount of weight, the fatty liver will start to recede. Like a 7% weight loss can get rid of you know, over 50% of fatty liver, and a 15% weight loss can actually restore beta cell function, pancreatic beta cell function, for insulin-dependent type 2 diabetics who haven't already ruined their pancreas. But that's kind of the nuts and bolts of that. And the body fat itself releases inflammation, you know, those inflammatory cytokines, and so it creates its own havoc, just your own being having more fat on your body. And that, you know, again, it just has a lot to do with the size of the meals and the constitution of the meals as to how poorly you're going to feel. So it's a challenge.
Yeah, it is hard because of those, you know, hunger hormones and being skewed, and almost, I don't know, you do get to those points when you are stage lean where, I'm sure you've had it, you know, the show is close and you are a robot, right? Like 6 to 8 weeks out. I mean, like you said, I said this the other day to my partner, when you're on stage, everyone goes, you're like this epitome of health, you know, like
Right.
your spectators and everything.
Yeah.
And like, I feel like fucking shit. And you pull it out of the
Yeah.
bag, obviously, you compete, you do what you need to do. But it's then that, you know, after the show, it's taken me a number of years, and I'm not going to lie, like yourself, you know, we've had to sort of do these things to learn and educate people moving forward. But
Yeah.
certainly now it's like, you know, I want to look at my meal and go, this is health. You know, I'm putting food in my body to fuel myself, to aid recovery, to aid performance, etc., etc. But it certainly gets lost in the bodybuilding space because we're so used to these extremes all the time, right?
Yeah. And, you know, I'm not mad about that. It is what it is. You're not going to get to stage and win a show and feel great. It's not going to happen. I've said many times that there's a difference between health and fitness, right? Health being the absence of injury or illness. Show me somebody who's never been injured, I'll show you somebody who's never won anything, right? And fitness is the ability to perform a particular duty or task. And whether that's a bodybuilding show or a UFC fight or a world's strongest man competition, or a 14-year-old competing in the Olympics in gymnastics, or a 10-year-old playing badminton in China, blowing out lateral collateral ligaments, you know, for repetitive strain. Fitness is not healthy. And the things that we put our bodies through to win these awards, you know, in bodybuilding, it's most humiliating because you get this little plastic trophy. At least in some sports, there's remuneration. You know, you can almost justify putting your body through that if you could become an NFL football player, although rare, at least you get compensated.
Yeah.
But there's a big difference, and I'm not mad at people. I've certainly pursued bodybuilding and powerlifting to its its highest levels and put my body through a lot. And fortunately, just as an aside, I got over 100 blood tests throughout my career, well over 100 blood tests throughout my career, going back as far as I can remember. I was able to see how my body was affected. You know, I would bulk up sometimes to over 300 pounds to powerlift, going back as far as 1995. Yes. And then I would diet down again to single-digit body fat. And I would do that back and forth. I would compete in a powerlifting meet, and then I would diet down and compete in a bodybuilding show. And then I would bulk up and compete in a powerlifting meet. So I was gaining 30, 40, 50 pounds on either end, you know, for many, many, many years, back and forth. I've gained and lost, and this is conservative, well over 1,000 pounds throughout my career, 25 years of competing. And I learned a lot of lessons along the way on both ends of the spectrum as to what I did wrong, what I did right. And I try and, you know, help my clients now. And, you know, we just talked about not over restricting in terms of diet and not over consuming in terms of bulking. But the blood tests were a key component, and I get those for my clients as well, so I can see, you know, how is this affecting you? You know, of course, all bets are off again the last 30 to 60 days before competition. You just put on a blindfold and go hard. But you don't want to stay that way year round. Hence, you know, how you opened the conversation, staying lean all year round. You also don't want to stay heavy year round. Yes. I worked with 𝗏𝗏 𝗵𝗏, Mountain from Game of Thrones, world's strongest man. Yep, 6'9", 440 pounds. I worked with Brian Shaw. I'm currently working with Mitchell Hooper, the world's strongest man. I've worked with a lot of those guys over the years. And the one thing I tell them is, let's not stay heavy year round. Let's diet down at least 7% of your body weight. That comes from the literature that we discussed. Yeah. Let's get your blood pressure under control. Let's get your blood sugars under control. Let's get your cholesterol under control. Let's stay there for a little while. And then I'm going to take you back up. And all that stuff's going to go to hell again. Hopefully not as bad as it was when you stayed there year round. I'm going to utilize, you know, I'm going to make sure you're using a CPAP, and I'm going to make sure you're taking your 10-minute walks after meals, so you're absorbing your blood glucose, and, you know, it has less impact on your blood sugars. Just as a side note, just taking a 10-minute walk after meals is twice as effective as metformin for reversing or preventing type 2 diabetes. And that's the #1 prescribed medication for diabetes in the world. A 10-minute walk after meals, 3 meals a day, 4 meals a day, whatever that is, 30, 40 minutes, a brisk walk, twice as effective as medication. I have all of my big athletes doing that. And it's, again, to help with the inflammation from the meal, helps their digestion, helps the blood sugar, the peak elevation and the duration of you know, what we call the area under the curve for blood sugars. You know, I'll make sure that they're eating less saturated fat as they're in that bulking phase. to try and minimize the rate at which the NAFLD progresses, which is inevitable when you're eating that much food and you're 400 pounds. And so, you know, I've been there and I work with people who are there, and we do everything we can within reason. Again, it's to win something, and that's what we do to ourselves. And then later we look back and wonder if it was all worth it.
Yeah.
I have no regrets. Eventually,
yeah,
we drop the weights, we get in shape, and you know, we're lean and mean. You know, fortunately for us, as much as we love lifting weights, and we have tried to impress the importance of that onto other people, you and I have seen over the last few years in particular, all of the longevity people are now on board. The Peter Attiahs, Mike Mutzel's, even like the David Sinclairs, who have made extraordinary claims about longevity that I won't go down that track. But you know, Dr. Gabrielle Lyons, I mean, the list goes on and on and on, that resistance training, and more recently, the American Heart Association put forth a statement that resistance training is as good as cardio for mortality risk. It's equivalent. It's not, well, together they're better, right? Do both is better than one or the other, but they're equivalent. Resistance training is finally taking its place, both in terms of longevity and or lifespan and health span in particular. And it's being encouraged now even by these organizations like the AHA and these longevity people like Dr. Peter Attiah as being a priority. If you had to choose between the two, you should choose because of its additional benefits. In addition to its cardiovascular benefits, you're getting the bone mineral density benefits, you're getting the anti-inflammatory benefits, you're getting the lean muscle mass retention, the strength retention, which bodes well as you age. We see that stronger people live longer and they live better. And so it's nice to see all that come around. You know, I know I'm an old power lifter guy who was, you know, 300 pounds, and I'm not claiming that, you know, my performance enhancing drug use is particularly good for my longevity. But here I am emerging on the other end at 56 years old, you know, at maintaining, you know, 10% body fat and training at I think a very reasonable level for my age and fitness. And it feels good to have other, you know, domain specific professionals in the industry talk about the importance of that.
I'm absolutely loving it. Hence, when, you know, I sent you the message to come on, it's like people, and I said this before we jumped on, you know, someone of your stature, a heavily muscled guy, you've been very successful in 2 different sports. You know, it's human nature for people to go, oh, this guy, you know, he's got a sick physique, I might listen to him. And then we're seeing this trend, you're right, of, you know, people in the industry that are big names talking about stress and recovery management, sleep apnea, these types of things. And certainly what you said there as well about, you know, I really like to talk to you because I spoke to Matt, Janae Kroc. We had that episode of, you know, her sort of, mate, honestly, this episode, you know, wow, you know, the striving to be authentic was the sort of message, but she actually found it very difficult, and she still finds it difficult to sort of step away from being a power lifter and weighing more to be able to perform as a power lifter, to then transition into being more feminine and losing muscle. So be interesting to know your take on, you know, how that feels to sort of step away from being, you know, at those heights of very high body weight for performance.
Excellent question. And it is a challenge because our entire identity, the reason we got into bodybuilding and powerlifting, the reason most people do, I would argue, the reason certainly I did as a skinny kid, you know, wrestled 115 as a senior in high school. I was 135 as a freshman in college, as an 18-year-old freshman. My first bodybuilding show, I weighed 156. I was 21 years old, 156. So there's a skinny kid, and that, of course, gives you a little bit of insecurity to begin with. And you start bodybuilding because there's something missing, right? It's not because you're an overconfident individual. It's because you lack confidence, generally speaking. Whether that's a good or bad reason, I think it's certainly a better pursuit than alternatives. So we get into the sport based on an insecurity. We define ourselves throughout the course of these many years that we compete as being the big, strong guy. And unfortunately, at times, as we've discussed, that can put you in a position to compromise your health, depending on how much weight you gain, or or even get injured or what have you, as would be the case with any sport. Yeah. And then at some point, and my career was rather lengthy, I was setting world records in my 40s, 43, 44, 45 years old. But at some point, that window of opportunity closes, and you have to consider that those blood tests are telling you things that you already know. But and I had a child at 44. I had my first baby girl, and that really changes your perspective. How long am I going to allow these biomarkers or my blood pressure? Fortunately for me, as I mentioned, I would bulk up to powerlift and diet down to bodybuild, and most of those biomarkers would improve as a result simply of weight loss. Yeah. And that's what the research suggests. 95% of health benefits are realized simply from weight loss itself, irrespective of diet. Yeah. Not recommending a poor diet, but yeah, that's the fact. It's that when you lose weight, you see improvements in blood pressure, blood sugars, lipids, all of those things improve. And so fortunately, I think the reason my career was as long as it was, this is in retrospect, because I certainly didn't plan it this way, was because I did go through those phases at which, I was doing a lot more volume and frequency. I weighed less, and I was training, every day. A lot of good cardiovascular training comes from those higher rep, higher volume sets and stuff. So, but eventually, and I saw this happening all around me. A lot of the powerlifter guys would stay heavy year round, and then you start seeing the complications from that. And even in the bodybuilding realm as well, I think everybody's aware of the high profile people who have passed away over the years. And almost every one of them without fail, and I knew many of them and had been friends with or trained with a lot of them who have passed, was off season, at a heavy weight, suffering from sleep apnea, probably not wearing a CPAP, with elevated blood pressure, unmanaged blood pressure for an extended period of years. And yes, they were using performance enhancing drugs, and that allowed them to get that heavy, and it allowed them to get apnea, and did raise their blood pressure. But it wasn't managed correctly. And so those are the interventions that I utilize with my athletes. I make sure that their blood pressure is under control, even if it needs medication during those times at which they're competing. And they all wear CPAPs, and we take the walks. We do everything we can to try and mitigate some of that damage. But like you said, the psychological part of being able to say to yourself, okay, I need to do something different. I need to redefine myself. I was maintaining, 285, 290 in the off season. I would compete at 275 in powerlifting. And when I finally decided to stop powerlifting, I dropped over 40 pounds in like less than 2 months. Went from 285 to 250, and then eventually another 10 pounds. And now here I am at 56, and I weigh 230, 227, 228. I stay right in there. I constantly stay lean. I'm not worried about how strong I am necessarily. I still want to lift as heavy as I can within reason, because I think that heavy work, barring exposing myself to potential injury, and I'm cautious about that, how much fatigue I accumulate. And heavy for me now, it's all relative. I used to squat 900, and now I can squat 6. And so, and people think that's a lot of weight, and I shouldn't be doing that. And I'm like, well, as compared to what? And I'm healthy. I have no injuries. My knees are fine. I don't have to wear knee wraps or straps. And I go swimming every morning. I take my 10-minute walks after meals. I lift weights, three times a week, probably regularly now. I don't lift as often or as much as I used to, and I watch my biomarkers very closely, obviously, which aren't a problem at this weight. I maintain 10% body fat. And that's kind of the biggest lever you can pull, that and good quality sleep. And I still use the CPAP. I've got a thick neck from squatting. 𝗏𝗏𝗵𝗏 from barbell medicine weighs 200 pounds. He wears a CPAP. He's got a thick neck from squatting. It's not necessarily just weight related, although that's the number one driver of apnea, is excess body fat. But it's just crowding of the airway, and a thick neck will do that. Yeah. And it'll cause you to stop breathing at night. And that has a whole host of problems. Blood pressure is one of the primary things. So yeah, it was difficult. I did have to redefine myself. I see old timers carrying around too much belly fat, still trying to be a big bench presser, and it frightens me a little. I got to be honest with you.
Yeah. I think it's certainly, it's never easy, like you say, that stepping away from an identity as such. But certainly I would say, that actually, yes, competing, we all have our period of time as competitors, etc. But we need to, I really like what you say, redefine, because it's like, what value can we see outside of that as a person also? And like you say,
Yeah.
go swimming and doing different things. Like, this can be exciting as well. We don't have to marry our purpose to being a competitor only, but we're in a fortunate position, of course, where we can help educate people and help people understand more about this sort of being a journey and building a body for life, right?
Yeah, and 𝗪𝗿 was a great example of that, and Eddie Cohn. I worked with both of them. When they say when the student becomes the coach, I was their student. Mark trained me for powerlifting, as did Eddie Cohn, through the years I was competing. And then after I was done competing and I was helping a lot of people lose weight, 𝗪𝗿 came to me, and he was 330 pounds with a systolic blood pressure of 190, and we did a podcast together, and I was pretty alarmed by his blood test, and I told him that something's got to change here. You've got kids. Yeah. And now look at him. He's a perfect example of somebody who had to redefine himself. He was no longer the powerlifter guy. Yeah. And he's 225 pounds, and he ran a marathon, and he jogs every day. And God bless him, he found something he loves to do, and he's fit. And I think he's setting a great example for people. But that's hard. He had other things. I had other things. I ran some very successful companies. I was on Shark Tank, and I've got a good business. I've got kids, so it's hard for some people who don't have other things to dump themselves into. You really need to find something. I mean, hell, now I play pickleball of all things. So, and I quite enjoy it, to be honest with you. And I just, if everybody could find something that they enjoyed that didn't require them to be the big guy, and to understand that the sun has set on that phase of their life, and their priority should be to get that blood pressure under control, and to think about their kids and their wife and their family, and move on and just be fit. You can still lift heavy and be lean, and you're not going to be as strong. There's just no way, but you can be healthy, and you can. I've always said bodybuilding is the fountain of youth. We discussed, that already with Peter T and all the rest of the AHA. If you're not obsessed about being the big guy, and if you just lift the weights, and I see guys in the gym now, my mentors, or not mentors, but my idols, the people I look up to now, the Robbie Robinsons of the world, in their late 70s. And there's a guy in my gym that's like 82 years old. He stands up stiff as a board. His handshake is firm. He's in there every day. And he's sort of lifting. He's mostly talking, and he smells terrible because he wears that, he uses that, what's that DMSO?
What's that?
It's like a thing, like a rub you put on, and it makes your breath smell like onions and garlic. It's terrible. All the old guys come in around that same time in the morning, and right around 10 a.m. They don't want to get up too early, I suppose. Yeah. And they spend 2 hours in the gym. They do about 4 sets. They talk a lot, and they smell like onions. But I'll tell you what, they've been doing it all their lives, and they're fit as a fiddle and strong, and they don't limp. And it's that I think, to me, is if I have aspirations now, it's to be able to perform at a high level even when I'm in my 70s, and I'm 56. So I'll be training another 30 years if I can.
Yeah, for sure. And when we talk about, your career, as it were, as powerlifter and bodybuilder, when you were competing, were you this switched on about the stress and recovery management? And was there sort of big differences as to what you would do to perform your best as an athlete at those different body weights?
Yeah, I didn't think about it as much between 88 and 97, when I was competing pretty consistently every year, a couple times a year. I was young. I was just focused on, I was tracking everything: eat, sleep, train, eat, sleep, train. I didn't think about it much. And then I stopped competing in 97, and I started my own company. And so I started training less. I started sleeping less. I started eating worse. You know how it is. You're burning the candle at both ends, and your business is 7 days a week, and you got payroll, and you're stressed. And so I did a video on YouTube called Stress for Success, where I talked about a time at which, during this time, I hadn't been to the gym in a year. I was eating dollar meals at McDonald's because it was about all I could afford. I living with roommates in a little apartment where we were trying to run our business out of. It was also our office. And I wasn't exercising regularly, and I was sleeping maybe 4 hours a night, and business was stressful. And I don't know, it was just, I had hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt from my company, and bills that we owed our vendors, and credit cards I'd run up, and everything else I'd cashed out and cleaned out to try and run our business. And I started having panic attacks. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with anxiety and panic attacks. I'd never experienced that in my life. Just as a brief side note, my mom was an addict all her life since I was a young kid, alcoholic, and then evolved into pain meds and eventually to psychiatric medication. She was routinely institutionalized for her poor mental health, and ultimately died of an overdose of fentanyl in her 70s. Drug addict all her life, and she suffered from very severe panic attacks, anxiety attacks. She would come home and she would stay in her bedroom for weeks at a time in the dark. And if the front door was open when she walked by, she would scream. And I mean, it was pretty severe. And she was pretty functional most of the time, but the severity of this was extreme, to the point again where she was screaming and yelling in a straitjacket, running up and down the hallways naked of the mental institution here in town. And all I could do is if I wasn't laughing, I'd be crying. I actually got a degree in psychology so I could try and help her. And I went into my professor and said I wanted to get a master's. And he said, what for? And I said, oh, my mom, I wanted to help her. And he said, have you ever been addicted to anything? And I'm like, no. He goes, you need to get yourself involved in something that you enjoy, because you don't understand. And I didn't understand. And I was always mad at my mom. I'll get back to the point here very quickly. I was mad at her for this condition, right? All of my years growing up as a teenager and even as a young child, I always resented her for going through these periods of this anxiety and all of this. Then I had an anxiety attack, and I was 32 years old, and it's the first time I ever experienced it. And suddenly at that moment, I understood. I talk about the empathy with, people trying to diet. Suddenly at that moment, I understood. And I was, ever since then, I've been much more helpful for my mother. So I went to this library and I bought a book called Stress for Success by 𝗵𝗲. And I sat down there at actually it was at Barnes & Noble. I still remember the store. I remember reading the book, and I remember it just was like a lights came on for me. Here was a guy who for 12 years competed and trained with such discipline and consistency, and life was great, I read the book, and the book wasn't about stress management per se. It wasn't like, meditating, and there's a place for that, certainly, but it wasn't the priority. The book was, how's your sleep? How's your diet? Are you exercising regularly? That was the bulk of the book. And I was like, wow, what an eye-opener. And so immediately I went back to getting regular sleep. Joined the gym. I started exercising regularly. I stopped eating at McDonald's. And I got to tell you, I mean, within just a matter of, it couldn't have been a few days or a week, everything started to get better. And my business started to thrive. I was hugely successful the years following that as a result. And I never really got into the other things. I mean, now I use what's called a worry journal. At night, I write things down. I kind of got that as a sleep aid from Dr. Matthew Walker, a sleep specialist, PhD, that was on Joe Rogan. Love him, fantastic guy. It was one of the things he talked about, research supported. And so I carry a yellow pad around everywhere. I'm writing right now as we talk, about the things that, I'm on the top of my head while you're asking a question. I carry a yellow pad around everywhere, and I write things down on it, my daily to-do list, and just everything that's going on that day, so I can cross things off. I get such a sense of accomplishment, But the worry journal was proposed, was to, at nighttime, just sit down with a piece of paper and you just start writing. Maybe it's some of the things that are on top of your head that you don't want to lay there in bed and be like, oh, don't forget.
Yeah.
You put it on your piece of paper, or something that's stressing you out.
Yeah.
And in that video, Stress for Success, I talked about the serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah.
And that's what I kind of use the yellow pad for, is that anytime something comes up that's a stressor or that I'm thinking about, I'll write it down and try and determine, is this something I can change, or not? But at least I'm able to offload it from, my CPU that has to get me through the day. I call it compartmentalizing, right? I can take it out of the way, and I can keep doing what I'm doing, and it's not interfering with everything else that I need to do that way. And sometimes I'll be angry about something, and I'm almost immediately like, why are you mad? And I have to find out, even if it's pulling over the side of the road, it's, what's going on? Why are you? And you're like, that's it, and I write it on my yellow pad of paper. Yeah. And I turn on my country music and I'm great, because it's either something I have no control over, or it goes on my to-do list, and I know I'm going to, I'm going to make a call, or I'm going to go to Home Depot, or I'm going to, whatever it takes, to get it done. I'm going to visit with, my students, my kid's teacher, but at least it's not preoccupying the space that I need to function well and feel well for the rest of the day. So the worry journal is a big one for me, but I never really got into all the other stress management tools, and I never looked at stress as a bad thing.
Yeah.
Same way I never looked at weight on the bar in the gym as a bad thing. Yeah, it's heavy, but I always found that, or the way I described stress, I think in the video, was if you can bench 200 pounds and you've got 100 pounds on the bar, it's easy. If you can bench 200 pounds and somebody puts 300 pounds on the bar, you're going to get crushed by it. And so stress to me is, how strong are you? Sleep, nutrition, exercise. Then you can handle more stress on the bar, and it doesn't feel heavy, right? And that's not to say there's some things that are, IRS comes knocking, you're like, but then you go to work, you get a tax attorney, and at least you put that in and you start managing it. But I don't think you can be. It appears to me, and my telephone company that I owned, I had over 100 employees, and I owned. I built single-family homes, and I owned multifamily properties, hundreds of units with hundreds of units of residents. You can imagine what that was like. I had a lot of stress, phone ringing 7 days a week, all hours, managing those companies over the years. Huge loans, the real estate market collapsed in 2007. I mean, I went through all of that. But I'm just convinced that you cannot be successful. And the more successful you are, the more stress you're going to be able to have to manage, whether it's employees or assets or, whatever business you're running, goods and services you're selling. They all require, more and more moving parts. And you have to manage that if you want to make money. Or you can go punch a card, work for someone else, have less stress, great. But that's not going to get you the payday that you might be looking for, if that's your priority. I'm just suggesting that stress isn't always a bad thing. And if you pay yourself first, sleep, good food, regular exercise, then all of that just seems to weigh less. And that's the way that I describe it.
I think that will, even the start of that story where you said about where the anxieties came from, the detriment to sleep and the nutrition, the lack of training, and then that's such a quick turnaround from just getting those fundamentals back. And I talk about this a lot. And again, like our subject today, where we entered, and it's like, is this boring to people? Now, beyond competing, obviously, we've spoken about that's the extremes, but for lifestyle clients, for people that are going to enjoy bodybuilding, it's like, let's get excited about the fundamentals, like building a sleep routine and foods and, meal combinations and things like that. And, it can be very exciting because you're pouring into yourself and filling up your cup, like you say there, to be able to perform your best, right?
It takes some education because you need to talk to your client. I do a lot of seminars. I've done over 200 seminars in 14 countries in all 50 states. I've traveled all over the world in the last 6-7 years. And one of the things I always tell, particularly high school athletes, collegiate athletes, is you don't grow in the gym. Very important. And I might even set it up by saying, who here thinks that you build muscle in the gym? And they'll all raise their hand. I'm like, nope. All you do in the gym is break down muscle. All you do when you're out there on the field is break down muscle. You don't grow in the gym. It's just the stimulus. And you grow eating and sleeping. You grow eating and sleeping. So if I can prioritize how important that is, and we know now, even in terms of weight loss, that exercise is not a terribly effective way to lose weight. We have that, what's that called? The constrained energy model of exercise, where the harder you train, the more compensation occurs. You get tired and hungry, you sit more and eat more.
Yeah.
Some exercise, of course, is great for health, but they're just not seeing an extraordinary benefit for the vast majority of people for that extra 40 minutes on the treadmill every night, which everybody hates. And so I don't prescribe it. 99% of weight loss is in the kitchen. Yeah. You're right. And I think I watched a video by Dr. Aaron Carroll, has a YouTube, and I can't remember the name of it right now. It's been some time since I saw it, but he said that the biggest loser would be really boring if it was just shot after shot of people not eating as much.
Yeah.
Which is the most effective way to lose weight. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. It's certainly, you know, that enjoyment that you can get from this lifestyle, you know, like you say there perfectly, for us as coaches, it's trying to install that into our lifestyle clients, because you said about it earlier on, where they come and they go, well, how long have I got to do this for? Like, what, am I losing weight forever? And that stops people starting. But it's like, of course, it's then our job to lose the weight, and then, you know, think about, okay, so is there a maintenance period? You know, maybe they don't want to do a growth phase, right? You know, like maybe it's more of a recovery phase, and having a bit more food, a bit less cardio, and then maybe we do a diet again and periodizing that. It's exciting for lifestyle clients, but there are coaches that overlook that, and it's like, well, if you don't compete, then you're not serious. And it's like, do you know what? Fuck that. You know, people need our help. Yeah.
And like you said, we talked about the fact that you have to find something enjoyable for them to do. The resistance training is great. What I've found, and I'm sure you've seen the same, is when I bring people in and I try and get them to lift something heavy. And then the next time they come in, I try and add a few pounds to it. And the next time they come in, I try and add a few pounds to that. And they feel a real sense of accomplishment that they've gotten stronger. And you and I both know it's neural adaptation. They're just getting better at performing the movement. They're just getting more coordinated. And but I'll take it, and I won't disclose that it's just their nervous system. It's like shooting free throws. The more you do it, the better you get at it. But you're probably not building an enormous amount of muscle. But it's the hook. And once they come in and they see over the course of 4 or 5 or 6 weeks a consistent, or even longer, this could be 3 to 6 months, consistently adding weight every single workout to like a little trap bar deadlift or something. That's not, it's not something that people would shy away from. It's a pretty easy movement. Or anything. That's the great thing again about the gym, is it's measurable and progressible. And so you just write it down. Okay, you did 3 reps at 75 pounds. They come in next time and they do 5 reps there. And you're like, oh my God, you only did 3 reps last time. That's the hook. That's the reason all these CrossFit women in particular switched over to powerlifting, because they really enjoyed the heavy weights and the progress that they were making, and they probably don't enjoy all the running around everywhere. So, and God bless them for changing our, what word would you use? Our perception of what fit is, where historically it had been, what am I thinking of? The models that wear those underwear at, what's the popular one that has the magazine and all that stuff? Sorry, I lost it, but
like a CrossFit vibe,
like the skinny, tiny Victoria's Secret model.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
That's what everybody wanted to be in the 70s and the 80s, and then CrossFit came around in the 90s, and all of a sudden now you're seeing powerful women with quads and and CrossFit, and it's like, wow. Because most women aren't those rail thin little genetically gifted. I can call it a gift, but I'm just saying that they're tiny. Most women have some thickness to them, as they should, because it bodes well for the reproduction. Whereas we both know that you get too skinny, now you got amenorrhea and a whole host of other problems, anemia and osteoporosis and osteopenia, all the things that happen with that female triad, and that we work so hard to avoid. And so, yeah, I think that we're fortunate that we do have some better role models that people aren't wedged into. And just the opposite happened to me. I was a 156-pounder when I first competed. And to become a pro bodybuilder in 1988, you had, at my height, at 6 foot, I needed to be 250. They didn't have mankini back then, right? So, and if they had, I wouldn't have tried to get to 250 or 260, I don't think, because I enjoy those physiques. I make fun of the guys with the board shorts, but that was me. And, but there was nowhere for me to compete. I didn't have a place. You know, and now they've got women's physique, bikini, wellness, you know, they've got all these places, and men's classic and men's physique. There's a place for everyone based on their own genetic predisposition. They don't have to force themselves. You know, guys 5'7" is never going to be center for the Lakers. It's not going to happen. You know, there's just certain people that are predispositioned. My wife's Samoan, our son's Samoan. He's 300 pounds when he was 15. He's not going to be running marathons, right? his knees are this big, you know, and he's just they're big boned people. They're not running marathons. I'm just saying that find something that you're actually you're predispositioned for, whether it's, you know, your body type or some physical talent that you may be better at than not. And then you'll just enjoy the process a whole lot better if you're not trying to make yourself into something you saw on Instagram that's really inconsistent with your genetic predisposition, because genetics reign supreme.
Yeah, for sure. I think that actually that segues into two more of the episodes that were covered in this series of how far a competitor's willing to go, and amateur and professional divisions. Similar sort of topics, but we covered quite a lot across the two. And it's like, it's our job as coaches, if we're working with competitors, to actually have this back and forth of what are your expectations. And I love how you mentioned, what made me think of it is genetics. It's like, you know, if you're made for IFBB or you're going to be a power lifter, you know, there is a certain merit in, you know, looking at what you're going to put into, you know, get your goal, or what you think your goal is. But then we get caught in this rabbit hole of, you know, particularly steroid use. You know, people are going, okay, so I'll do whatever it takes, and they're, you know, high doses, etc. And that's obviously a stressor on the body as well. And then this whole sort of rabbit hole of, like, you know, gaining this extreme amount of muscle, dieting down. And, you know, some competitors, you can't speak with them. They are just bodybuilding, you know?
Yeah. I dirty bulked. I got too heavy. We've learned now that that's not a great idea. And I over restricted and did too much cardio on many of my bodybuilding shows and lost a ton of muscle in the process. So I've made poor decisions on both ends of the spectrum. And now we have enough, I think, good information out there, enough quality domain specific professionals who also compete, that we can get much better advice from. There's the Brad Schoenfelds of the world, and the Lane Nortons, and, you know, the list goes on and on, the Greg Nuckols and Alan Oregons, and there's just so many, you know, Eric Trexler. There's just so many PhDs in physiology or nutrition who also lift weights at a very high level. The folks from Barbell Medicine, they're a perfect example. Jordan Feigenbaum and Austin Baraki, putting out just fantastic information. It is unfortunate, as I mentioned earlier, that there is a lot of crappy information on the internet, but there's also, if you can sift through, and they're emerging. You notice that some of these guys are getting more and more popular as people start to see that there's bad information, there's good information. And what's interesting, as an aside, I saw this trend coming many years ago, and my post-grad after psychology was exercise science. I spent 2 years University of Oregon studying all the anatomy, phys, kinese, bio, you know, physics, chem, and things have changed a lot since then. I mean, that was back in, you know, 1989, 1990. Things have changed a lot. A lot of things that we used to learn or were taught are no longer the case. So I saw this trend about 5 or 6 years ago, as I was getting deep into I'd stopped competing and I started training more and more people. And I started seeing these academically qualified individuals start to call out and challenge information from other people on social media.
Yeah.
Most famously is probably Layne Norton's Fuckery Friday, which was a good one. And so I went back to school and I took some more courses and I got my CSCS and I partnered with Dr. 𝗵𝗵𝗪𝗂, who's a PhD RDN, who was director of dietetics and instructor in their exercise phys department at UNLV. And we spent some years together training and compiling the Vertical Diet book that I published, and I have an ebook called The Vertical Diet, which is now in version 4.0. So even it has changed over the course of the last 7 years. And I provide the updates for free. It's kind of a living document. If you bought version 1.0, you continue to get all the updates where I'm able to bring, to expand it and revise anything that the information has changed. But I said to myself many years ago, I told David, I don't want to end up on Fuckery Friday. That's not my goal.
That's a good motivation.
Yeah, and I've stepped on a few landmines, and I know Layne. I had a chance to train with him here in Vegas one time, and a lot of respect for him and what he does, and others in the industry who are doing the kinds of things he does.
Yeah.
Who put out really good information. The Docs Who Lift, the 𝗕𝗏𝗁sky brothers, and Dr. 𝗦𝗏 is doing a great job. And
yes, I love that.
He's doing great. Food Science Babe is another one that gets into all of the organic stuff and the toxicity stuff, and because she's a food scientist, and so there's a whole host. I'm sure I'm leaving some names out, but I have a list of people who I follow very closely, and I listen to hundreds of hours of podcasts, and I read everything they produce, and I've worked hard to make sure that I've used my platform responsibly, and I've stepped on a few landmines over the years. I've said some things that, as have all of them, which I find to be the most respectful thing about everybody that I just mentioned, has done an episode where they've said, I used to believe this, I no longer believe that. I was wrong about this. Now I think that this is the case. And Layne Norton is certainly one of the people who's done that, as well as just everybody else that I mentioned has come forth and said, I don't believe that anymore. This is probably better advice. And they speak with less certainty, of course, which can be frustrating, as mentioned earlier, when my customers said, just tell me what to eat. They say things like, the evidence suggests, and things like that. They're less certain about their responses. Anytime somebody says always or never, they're probably a quack.
For sure. I like as well where you said there about your book, how this proves to me that you are actually doing this to help people. Now, of course, doing the episode, I'm getting to catch your vibe, which is actually marrying up with your Instagram, but also, continuing investing in your book to help the people that have invested in, the things that you're sharing. And that's so important as well, because it's like, what are we doing this for, Stan? We want to actually help our community.
Yeah. And I want to learn as much as I can, so I'm as helpful as possible, certainly for my clients. I want to give them the best information. I want them to be successful. And I mean, if there was something out there that I thought worked better, I would let them know. But that's the challenge, is that people who speak with such great certainty about things that don't provide a very meaningful outcome, I get skeptical. I could go on and on with example after example, but people will use research, which is not evidence. There's research to support either side of any argument. That doesn't mean it's evidence. It doesn't mean that the body of evidence supports an individual study. There's certainly a hierarchy of evidence, as we know, from the bottom of which is your rat studies and your petri dishes and people's anecdotes and testimonials. But and that continues to climb from there to epidemiology, and certainly to randomized controlled trials, and then systematic reviews of those trials reviewed by, again, domain-specific professionals who are uniquely qualified to understand the body of literature. Just using yourself as an appeal to authority is not very convincing. Or your credentials. Some people are an MD but have horrible nutrition advice. If you go to redpenreviews.org, redpenreviews.org, 7 PhD nutritionists go through and look at some of the more popular books that have been written, ones that I've read, who I was who were fascinating books. You know, they're very good journalists or authors. Turns out that they rank the accuracy of the information, the references that they use. They go in and they actually read them and find out if the claim they made was consistent with the study. And you'll see some of those books are like 25% accuracy, 40% accuracy. They're horrible. And in a lot of cases, they're MDs in the vast majority of cases. A lot of these books written by MDs, and I'm not, of course, saying anything bad generally about the profession. I'm just saying that a lot of these books, we've seen more recently, Dr. Gundry has been called out for his, a lot of his claims, and who's the other one that just did the fructose interview on Huberman, got absolutely crushed by the scientists with his claims that were completely erroneous. Ludwig, and of course we've got Dr. Jason Fung, who's just can't get off of his carbohydrate insulin model that's been disproven over and over and over again for years now. So fortunately, we do have people reviewing, holding some of these people accountable. But here's the challenge, is that, as I mentioned, we all have success stories. Intermittent fasting proponents, diet tribes, keto proponents, vertical diet proponents, you know, Dr. Fung followers. They've all tried those methods and felt as though their life was changed as a result of that. They did something. And that's consistent with the research that's been done. One of the largest research studies that's been done, over 10,000 participants for, I think, going on 20 years now. The Weight Control Registry has looked at over 10,000 participants who have lost over 60 pounds and kept it off for more than 6 years. 95% of them went on a diet, any diet. They had a plan. And if any of these diet tribes, carnivore, keto, vegan, vertical, intermittent fasting, if any of these diet tribes have an individual try their method and that individual loses weight, and as a result feels better, as mentioned, 95% of health benefits realized strictly from weight loss itself, then those individuals will sing the praises of that particular diet and may even start to say it's the only diet and that nothing else works. And as I mentioned with the pain intervention stuff, that, you know, most people resolve their pain spontaneously and will attribute the success of that pain resolution to whatever practitioner they were going to at the time, whether it's you know, cryotherapy or needling or chiropractics or physical therapy or somebody burning incense over them or wearing a copper bracelet. But we know in the research, and Greg Nuckols said this, I'll quote him, he's a brilliant guy. He said that chiropractic is physical therapy, and it's not an indictment on that. There's some great therapists, is maybe better than nothing, but pales in comparison to any kind of movement. Say the same thing about diet. If you can maintain a calorie deficit on any kind of diet and lose weight, you're going to realize some very significant health benefits as a result and feel great. And you're going to sing the praises of those individuals and be a devout follower of that, that tribe. And if you say anything, to the contrary, that, oh yeah, that's no better than any other diet, you know, they'll attack you with fervor. They'll be very angry at you.
For sure.
And that's what we experience.
When I told my partner that you'd accepted my invite to come on, I was like, I can't believe it. You know, Stan's going to come on the pod. And he actually said, one of his clients, who's actually my best friend, he's more like a brother, but his name's 𝗪𝗏. I'm going to have to get you to shout him out. 𝗪𝗏, I messaged him saying, I hear that you're going to be very happy about this person coming on the podcast. And he was like, oh my fucking God, he's my guy, like the vertical diet. And we're talking about here how, you know, someone buys into if they gain benefits. And he was like, it completely sorted out my GI and it really, you know, changed his life. So I know that he's going to listen to this. Can you give him a shout?
Oh, of course, 𝗪𝗏. Thank you, brother. I appreciate it. And I'm always overwhelmed when I hear that, and it's kind of it's very rewarding. I'm very humbled when people say that to me, because you know, this vertical diet was kind of birthed from my personal experience, and the fact that other people are also benefiting it just kind of gives me some satisfaction that I'm doing something right here, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, he's going to listen and be like, oh my God, he said my name. Now, before we wrap up today, I normally do a listener question, but I'd actually like to ask you a question myself, and it feeds into us sort of not necessarily calling people out, as it were, but in regards to recovery management and what we've sort of seen pumped out over recent years about the use of ice baths. Now, I thought this could be a really good way to sort of finish up and get your opinion, and if you've got any personal anecdote in regards to how that could actually help recovery.
Yeah, you know, and I kind of touched on a little bit of that. I think I did a video called "The Best Way to Recover from Training" or something like that, and I talk about the big rocks. The eating and sleeping is huge. Probably the biggest one, of course, sleeping and eating is huge.
Yeah.
Probably the biggest one is just not accumulating too much fatigue, not training beyond your current level of fitness. Yeah. An ounce of prevention being worth a pound of cure. I think most people end up just subjecting themselves to too much stress too fast, whether it's repetitive strain or a singular load. And of course, there's nothing you can do about dynamic sports injuries, but I would say there's nothing to do. Obviously, the stronger people will be more resilient, but that's first and foremost, obviously. Sleeping, eating healthy, and then just not overtraining. And you want to train hard, but be cautious that you're being realistic about your progressions, that they're within your capability. And that, otherwise, you're going to start either getting a major injury in one lift, or you're going to start accumulating repetitive strain and getting tendonitis, etc. And I've experienced all of that. And I think I did one called "I Broke My Back," another one called "Keys to Pain-Free Knees." Those are both videos that I did to talk specifically about those injuries and how I recovered from them. And what the science says, and I think one of the best people that does this is, again, is Bardo Medicine and Austin Baraki. And he talks about the work of Dr. Larimer Mosley from Explain Pain out of Australia. And they found pain to be fascinating, what they call the biopsychosocial method. That there's a huge psychological component to pain. And that what happens is, and the term that Greg Nuckols used, is that when people experience pain, they become kinesiophobic. They stop moving. It's exactly the opposite of what you want to do. Earlier I mentioned any type of movement is far superior than any manual intervention. I always say things that are done to you or for you are rarely as effective as things you can do for yourself. Yeah. And so I'm big on movement, and I'm big on frequency of movement. So I like 3 10-minute walks, or like Hafthor uses a bike because he's 400+ pounds. So walking, his feet don't tolerate that much, but it's the frequency that matters. Doing the 10-minute bikes, you know, if you have knee or hip problems, and under a little modest tension, 45 seconds, 15-second rest, do it 10 times. It's 10 minutes. You get lots of blood in there, and blood's the life force. That's, you know, motion, lotion, that whole tribe. And it stimulates the lymphatic system, which helps take, of course, the waste materials out. And your heart has a pump to bring blood to your body, but your joints aren't innervated. The cartilaginous tissues in particular of your joints, your knees and all that stuff, they aren't very well or at all innervated. And the only way that nutrients get into them is through that pressure of movement, and to help push things in. They're like a sponge, and they'll soak up the necessary nutrients that they need, and then they'll expel them out. And then when you're moving, that lymphatic system will start to draw all of the waste. That's how you get inflammation out of the system, etc. So the problem with something like ice in general, great for a distraction therapy for relieving the brain's signal for pain in the area. So say in season, when you're playing football or hockey or anything, and you got a game that day, it might be comfortable to go do some icing that morning, because at least you won't feel pain, and psychologically you won't have an inhibition of performance potentially. Yeah. But icing after training, when you're trying to elicit a hypertrophy response, suppresses the necessary inflammatory cascade that actually helps facilitate that hormonal milieu that then helps you grow from that training session. So icing is not recommended for immediately following workouts. So that's what I would say about icing. And there's other treatments. I think heat seems to have a better benefit. There doesn't seem to be any downside to sauna. Although then you get the Joe Rogans of the world who turns everything into a competition. Next thing you know, he's like, I'm going to turn this sauna up to 1,000 degrees and stay in here for 4 days. And he's got a puddle of sweat underneath him. It's like there's extremes to anything, right? And as mentioned earlier, I think that things that you do are better than things that are done to you, and the meaningfulness. 𝗬𝗵𝗵's famous, and God love him. He's trying, and he's evolving. He's learning. He's having better and better people on his show, but he's still. And he's not responsible for some of the things his guests say, I suppose. But nor is it his job to, I guess, learn everything about it and challenge them. I don't know. But he's platformed some pretty interesting people, as has Dr. Peter Attia over the years, who I think is a brilliant guy. He's a Stanford grad, Johns Hopkins surgeon, certainly a 𝗫𝗫 level genius. He's awesome to listen to. But he went through, he was keto, he was intermittent fasting, he made some extraordinary claims about life extension with metformin. None of that turned out to be true. He doesn't do any of those things now, but he's so, what term would you use, obsessive about all of his sports throughout all of his life, and was very successful at many of them as a result, including his education, that he did it for quite a long time. and it was hard to watch 3 years of pissing on keto sticks when, we haven't been in the industry for 30 years. We know that hey, it's probably not magic. And then those 7-day fasts, and it seems like another one gets birthed every other day. Now we got Gary Brecka running around making the same claims about fasting, and poor Dana White is out there. Yeah, you reduce your cancer risk by 70%. It's like, no, Dana, you don't. And it's dangerous to make those claims. And you give, again, like we started off talking about giving false hope to people and maybe diverting them away from the things that we know work. To what degree is, maybe not satisfactory, but better than the alternative, which is, fasting, thinking you're going to cure cancer. Outrageous. And so there's lots of folks who have said lots of things over the years that we wished had weren't said. Did I lose track of the question? What was the original question?
It's the ice baths, isn't it? We
covered the ice baths. There we go. Yeah, and then I went off on my rant.
You do see it. It's one of those. That's why it fed really nicely into, because I was like, I want to ask him that question, because actually it's like you see these crazes, and it's like everyone's going in an ice bath, and I've lost this amount of weight, and I've got this, blah, blah, blah. But actually, again, a big undercurrent for both of us in the space is everyone's an individual. Everyone can, of course, change their body composition, but finding what works for you that you could adhere to and enjoy is always going to be the best route. But sometimes you've got to explore different things and accept, that the mythologies that when you go on Instagram, right, and you see something that is built into your, you see it and it's like, wow, this person's the oracle. And it's like, take a moment to go, is this because you have an emotional tie to this method, or is it actual rationale,
Yeah, and look, it isn't my intent to shit on anybody's, personal program, intermittent fasting, keto, whatever. A bunch of extraordinary claims have been made. We don't have time to go down into all of them, but the evidence just doesn't support that it's any better than any other program that's adhered to for a long period of time. The big rocks are still going to be, obviously, the sleep, healthy nutrition. That quickly gets disagreed upon. I think most people assume that it's something that is not too much food, and it's more whole foods than ultra processed. Yeah. From there, it's a huge, diversion to who agrees with what. And then anything else is just maybe not even icing, but just a little cherry on the cake. If you enjoy doing an ice bath, do an ice bath. Just understand there's a potential downside to your hypertrophy if you ice bath immediately after training. The stretching people got all pissed off and came after me because I said stretching doesn't prevent injury. It doesn't aid in recovery. It doesn't improve performance. And there is some evidence that actually decreases performance. And so they just went apeshit. Well, I also said that it probably increased injury risk, which we don't have the evidence for that. But hey, generally speaking, if you enjoy stretching, you get equivalent benefit from lifting weights through a full range of motion. You get equal flexibility benefit. There's no evidence that stretching is any better than training through a full range of motion for flexibility. Yeah. And so it's just a matter of how many hours do you have in a day? Yeah. You know, and what do you want to do with that time is going to give you the biggest return on your investment. And do you enjoy it? And that's where I'm back to, hey, do you enjoy ice baths? Do you enjoy stretching? Knock yourself out. Don't forget to live, you know, and don't ascribe some sort of magical benefits to it that just aren't supported by the evidence, you know, particularly if it causes people to do that instead of something that we do have proof that's better with their time. So
yeah, well, what an episode, Stan. I've absolutely loved it.
I can already see the comments. We're here
for it, Stan. We're here for it. We're the good people. We are the good people. And you know, the listeners, they know that I don't just, you know, DM people and say, oh, can you come on? It's actually people that I see are going to bring value to the listeners, because that for me is important. And it's also giving them a voice to, you know, understand that there is so much shit out there, but there's also good people in our industry like yourself and people that you've mentioned that actually want to help. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. It was great.
You are such a great guy. 𝗪𝗏 was right. Thank you.
Thank you, 𝗪𝗏. I appreciate you.
See you later.
Bye. Thank you. Hey!